Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to a very special episode. This is one of my favorite episodes to do through the course of the year. This is my roundup of album recommendations that I want to give you guys that are albums that I heard throughout the year that I just haven't been able to spotlight yet on the channel. I did one for the first half of the year, sometime in June or July I believe. But this is for the second half of the year and all of the cool albums that have come out that have grabbed my attention and that I've been enjoying and loving, but just haven't had the time to talk about on the channel because there's just so much new music out there to go through and it's impossible to be able to discuss it all with you guys. So I'm going to do this in a quick format, just quick, like less than 1 minute descriptions of each of these albums. It's more just a way to bring awareness and let you guys go off and check these out if you're interested. I'm going to put a list of all these albums in the description, so if you miss one, because I'm going through them so fast, you can just go into the description and find a list, and I'll try to put links to like the Bandcamp page or their webpage or some place to check out their music if you're interested, and if what I describe sounds like something you'd be into at all. So let's jump into it. I shouldn't preamble too much here. I want to get into it real quickly. So this is just an alphabetical order of artists, so there's no preference in the way that I'm ordering them, just alphabetical by artist. So a good smattering of things. I think there's a good eclectic mixture of different styles of prog in this mix. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. First up, we've got Agusa and their album Prima Materia. This is psychedelic space rock from Sweden. Fun instrumental symphonic prog with plenty of jazzy flutes and crunchy organs and a near Canterbury style feel, full of whimsy and cheerful vibes. Agusa is a great prog quartet. Actually, there's 5 members, at least on this release. And they just have a great breezy quality to their music. I love the jazz influence, the Canterbury influence, like I mentioned. There's a lot of flute throughout the release, which I find really refreshing. So if you like that sort of breezy style prog that just has a lot of jazz inflections and fun symphonic undertones, this is a great album to check out. So I was really enjoying the sounds of this one. I think there's a lot to enjoy, some really catchy melodies, some fun things going on in the music that grab your ear, and it just makes for a fun time. So that's the first one on the list. Number 2, I've got Arabs and Aspic and their new album, The Magic of Sin. This is symphonic prog from Norway. This is a fairly recent release. It actually came out like a week ago, so I haven't had it for very long. But it's 40 minutes of great, sumptuous, classic symphonic prog, a bit of King Crimson vibes and flavor into their sound with a little bit of a heavy and psychedelic flavor, maybe harkening back to like a late 60s, early 70s sound. There's plenty of big epic type of sounds in this. All the tracks are fairly lengthy. There's only 3 tracks on the album, a 12-minute track, a 10-minute track, and like a 20-minute track. So there's a lot to digest here with some big epic sounds and some great crunching organs and expressive guitar noodling. Just super progressive, but really rocking out as well. This one really impressed me, even though it's fairly new, but I felt like I had to plug it into the list. Arabs and Aspic, The Magic of Sin, you've got to check that one out. Arc Echo is my third pick here, Final Pitch. This is progressive metal from the United States. They're pretty much a instrumental progressive metal group. They have that typical djenty kind of prog metal style to them like you hear in a lot of other modern prog bands, but I feel like they have a bit of a jazzy kind of funky quality to them, especially in the keyboard moments, and they have some epic flavors, some cool modern and fresh sounds to their makes, and I just thought this was a really great showcase for their talents. There's even a track here that features vocals. They have Anthony Vincent on the track Final Pitch. And so it's cool to see this different kind of flavor to their sound that you don't typically expect. Jordan Rudess guests on keyboards on the second track, Illuminati, so you get a little bit of that Dream Theater flavor. But overall, it's just a really fun ride with some really over-the-top playing. They're really impressive, but they never lose their knack for cool melodies and interesting things that grab your ear and hook you into the sound. So definitely something worth checking out. Number 4, I've got Closure in Moscow and the album Soft Hell. This is more of like an alternative indie prog rock sort of vibe. This is a band from Australia. You can imagine like the Deer Hunter as a touch point for them, but a little bit more poppy and catchy and hooky, especially this record, which I think leans more into that side of their sound. Plenty of grooves and catchy hooks here, great funky feel to a lot of especially the earlier tracks. Some tracks have an infusion of maybe a more modern pop feel like Absolute Tearfield, so you get a really cool smattering of poppier indie prog type tracks here that catch your ears, that are fun to listen to, that you can bop your head along to and have fun with, but have some depth as well in their sound that puts them above like just your standard pop rock sound that you might hear out in the wild. So really cool, really fun, and something that feels very modern and fresh, and I had a lot of fun listening to. Number 5, we get more into kind of a traditional proggier mold. This is Galahad with The Long Goodbye, Neo-Prog from the UK. To me, what I find in their sound is this blend of this Neo-Prog, but with some 80s synth and electronica styles. You can hear some funk bass even in the opening of Behind the Veil of a Smile. I found The Righteous and the Damned to be a really interesting track. It had this a cappella style opening where the vocals from Stu Nicholson just really are the central focus before the band kicks in with this very unique European folk ethnic style flavor before it gets into a heavier direction. Just really caught me off guard and was a really interesting, unique style that they were going for in that track. And then, of course, they have a big epic track towards the end, the title track, The Long Goodbye, which is your typical Neo-Prog epic. Some solid sounds here. They're not really reinventing the wheel. Perhaps that Righteous and the Damned track is the most experimental and different, but everything else is their typical sound, but done expertly well. That Neo-Prog style that many people fall in love with. I think sounds really crisp and clear, the great production values. There's a couple of bonus tracks as well on this. So there's a lot to dive into, and it's a really fun album. I like that the album actually isn't too lengthy. It's fairly short, just has 5 tracks to the main album, but they're all pretty interesting and intricate, and a great blend of like that classic prog, but with some 80s flavors and also some newer electronica elements. I think they have a really cool sound that's worth checking out. Number 6 band here, Haunt the Woods, and their album Ubiquity. This is crossover prog from the UK. This is blending some styles from like prog, folk, and pop influences. Some of the bands they cite as influences are Pink Floyd, Muse, Jeff Buckley, Radiohead, and they definitely have that indie alternative type sound to them, but I think they bring a little bit of some theatricality, some heavier moments at times, but then sometimes they can really lay back and groove in that more folky type style. The opening track, Fever Dream, is big and theatrical, bringing to mind some Muse influence before things get laid back and folky in those next few tracks, bringing Radiohead sensibility to mind with some of the more falsetto style vocals that they bring about them, some beautiful harmonies with an indie folk texture, beautiful string accents like on Solid Gold. They just have really sumptuous vocals, really great melodies. You really can feel their passion and power in these tracks, even when they're sometimes more subtle and more laid back and folky. So I love some of the Pink Floyd atmosphere. There's even some David Gilmour inspired guitar on the track Home. So a really great album that's well worth checking out if you like this more indie flavored prog, maybe a bit more folky and laid back throughout most of the record, but a few moments of Muse type power and theatricality driving it home in different sections. So really interesting and cool stuff there. Number 7, this is Hemina and their album Romancing the Ether. This is progressive metal from Australia. This album is basically just one long song. It's a suite with multiple parts to it. Melodic metal with lots of lead guitar shredding and complex rhythms and added keyboard textures. There's some great soaring vocals and dynamic switch-ups to the sound. There's an explosive opening of Strike 4 before we get into more of a lighter atmospheric type section with female vocals and Embraced by Clouds. Dissolution is a really interesting track that brings almost like this dark techno dance club rave type vibe with wild shredding guitars before we get to a more typical soaring prog metal ending in Revelations. So it's a really cool long track that gets a lot of different flavors into the time that it settles in. and is a really fun ride for those who like this prog metal style. So really fun album. Once again, fairly shorter, but it really breezes by and is a lot of fun to hear the different sections and different things going on in that mix. Another progressive metal group, number 8, is Ion's Counterintuitive from Prague. This is very solid progressive metal. It can get pretty hard when they want to. So there's some slight sections of more aggressive type styles. The vocalist even has moments where they can go into kind of a screaming type style. But for the most part, the vocals stay fairly melodic and beautiful in the makes of this heavier progressive metal stew. There's some great synth work beneath some hard-hitting riffs and drumming. The vocals, like I said, can range from these more subdued, beautiful sounds to these screams. Great sense of melody. There's some catchy moments throughout all these tracks. I love the spacey, dreamy harmonies that appear on Faith. Love the more laid-back, folky vibe and Constant Feelings with some sumptuous strings. Out of Sight showcases a bit of a harder edge for the group with some wicked minor chords. So it's just a really cool atmosphere, and they're not afraid to go heavy. Think bands like Vola or Tesseract, perhaps, but with less growling, with less aggression, and you might get close to what Ion's all about. So a really cool group that I just fell in love with. Their album hasn't been out for very long, but it's been a really fun one to listen to over the course of the past few weeks. So another cool, solid recommendation if you're a fan of that progressive metal style. Switching it up completely to something a bit different, at number 9 we've got Jordsjø and the album Salighet. This is symphonic prog from Norway. So you get some classic Norwegian symphonic prog feels, not too far removed from bands like Anglagard and Wobbler. Plenty of classic 70s elements, a folk tinge to it, a sense of whimsy and playfulness in the soundscapes. The lyrics are all in their native language, but that adds to the charm of it. It's full of an organic type feel with piano, acoustic guitars, and sublime harmonies with flute accents. It just breezes through, and every track is a highlight and has some really cool instrumental moments. And if you like this more breezier, jazzier, symphonic style prog that these Norwegian bands tend to lean into with more folkier elements, this should be a standout release. It's a really strong album that I really fell in love with and thought was really fun and cool. Even though I typically struggle with foreign language albums because I tend to like to grab onto the lyrics in English since that's my native language, but I'm trying to expand my taste a bit, and I think it's done expertly well here. So it's a really strong release and one I heartily recommend to listen to. Album number 10 on my list today is Lalu and the Fish Who Wanted to Be King. This is progressive metal from France, and really it's transitioning more into more modern progressive rock rather than metal. There's not too much of that heavier metal sound that I think categorized the band earlier in their history. This is basically a outing from French keyboardist composer Vivian Lalu, and bringing together a bunch of musicians who are really strong. We've, of course, got Damien Wilson on vocals, who's all over the release. There's a slight heavier edge to their sound, but I almost hear like an 80s AOR type influence also. I really love the expressive vocals from Damien Wilson throughout the release. There's plenty of strong melodic hooks to grab hold of, a tinge of maybe a pop edge to some of the tracks to give you some pop hooks to grab hold of as you're listening through with this 80s aesthetic baked underneath. Amnesia 1916 is a great epic centerpiece for the album, a 14-minute track that shows the band's skills and their ability to tell exciting stories through music, and they're able to insert plenty of instrumental fireworks that you might expect from a prog band of this caliber. So a strong, solid release that I really enjoyed. The more I heard it, I thought it was a really cool one that gives you a lot of that melodic feel from these more modern prog bands that I really love. So that one's a good one. Item number 11 here, Marek Arnold's Artrock project. This was interesting as well. Marek Arnold is a very prolific artist who plays, I believe, saxophone, clarinet, tenor, soprano, recorder, He does a lot of those types of instruments for a lot of modern prog bands. He's in Seven Steps to the Green Door, Toxic Smile. He's played with a lot of different bands, with Flaming Row, United Progressive Fraternity, Dominic. He's just a very prolific artist, and he decided to put out this big project that features tons of different people in the prog scene. You see the likes of Peter Jones, Arno Menzies, you get Marco Miniman, Craig Blundell, Marco Bernard from Samurai of Prague, you got Kali Wallner, Martin Schnella, Luke Machin, Derek Sherinian, Adam Holzman, Sean Timms, just all these notable names, if you've been following the modern prog scene, are all showcased on this really excellent symphonic powerhouse of an album. Starts off with a big, powerful epic called The Story of Separation and Loss. There's some more subdued ballad-esque type tracks in the middle with Stay, Papillon, Come Away With Me. There's an interesting track called Time of Mystery, which has some focus on these horns and swirling vocals in a bit of a classical type style, and it all culminates in this futuristic noir type track, multi-part suite called Berlin 2049, which I believe has some influence from like the Blade Runner series. So really interesting stuff going on here. An album that I didn't hear much discussion about, but has a lot of cool progressive rock flavor, some bombastic elements, and just a whole lot of fun throughout the record with some great performances. Highly recommended. Number 12, for another different flavor, we've got the Mommyheads and their album Coney Island Kid. This is more of like a power pop type vein, maybe indie rock from the US. Really quirky instrumentation and vocals, maybe a bit of a Jellyfish type vibe, but with a darker, more Radiohead flavor on top of it. Love the poppy elements here, but they still managed to showcase some interesting instrumentation at the same time with some quirky tempo shifts and things going on in the mix. It's a bit of a concept album about one of the main band members' childhood, and it's dripping with that feeling of nostalgia back to his experiences going through these different places that they're talking about on Coney Island. So it's a really cool album with a great unique flavor to it. Like I said, not totally prog. It's more of like a power pop type thing, but there's enough quirkiness and different kinds of instrumentation in the mix that I think it can fit within the prog mold as well. So a really diverse and interesting collection of songs that it's worth checking out, especially if you like that power pop style that you hear from a band like Jellyfish. Number 13, a fantastic record here. This is Mondo Drag and the album Through the Hourglass, psychedelic space rock from the US. Of course, the definitive reference point for this release is Pink Floyd. You get a lot of those Floydian sounds throughout this record. It's a fairly short record. It feels like it could be a classic record plucked out of the early 70s. There's a delightful classic psych prog style to this, where they really sit in the groove, sit in the pocket, and let these pieces breathe and groove along. To me, the clear highlight of this album is Passages. The 11-minute instrumental halfway through the record has a slow atmospheric build with plenty of eerie keyboards before it explodes into a high-octane jam with some soaring guitars and big epic ending moments. The rest of the tracks stay in this satisfying groove and always sitting right in that pocket that you want to hear in this kind of Pink Floyd type groovy based band. Really cool stuff. This is one of my favorite albums for the year that I wish I would have done more of a focus on. It's going to be on my list for favorite albums for the year, so really excited for people to check that one out. So definitely a hearty recommendation there. Then for something a little bit different, at number 14, Osaka Punch with their album Makes Ape. This is crossover prog from Australia. And it has so many different styles and different things going on. A blend of a lot of interesting flavors and sounds from the worlds of metal, rock, and pop, and even jazz. Just as an explanation of the type of things you can expect, the album opens with Heat Death Ray, which has some loungy piano and tasty vocal harmonies before a riff enters in with a more metallic crunch, and then we're led to these more funky type verses with a pop-centric feel. So just in this one track, we get so many different influences and styles. Later on the album, we get a funky Red Hot Chili Peppers type aesthetic and how we operate. We get Slink, which is a short jazz metal fusion type workout. Too Old has a whimsical old school hip hop flavor before it morphs into this kind of 30s doo-wop jazz lounge vibe. And Heckle and Jive ends the album with a more modern progressive metal flavor. So you get a whole host of different influences and things into their sound here. It could be a little bit too eclectic and strange for some. It has a very modern, alternative kind of aesthetic baked in as well that may not appeal to people who like more of the old school style prog, but it was clever and interesting and unique enough that I had to put it on my list and mention it here at number 14 here. Number 15, Resistor, Illuminator. This is crossover prog from the United States. A strong rock-flavored release with lots of focus on these dual guitars. I believe one of their things that they focus on is that they have two main guitar players, and there's one in each ear in the stereo sound, so you get to hear the differences between the two artists and their guitar playing. You can separate out what they're doing. It's a very organic sounding record with classic rock elements, but they also add a folk flavor with some wonderful violin and flute, courtesy of Steve Unruh, who is basically the center of this group and is the mastermind behind it. Lots of great melodies and some lengthy instrumental jams throughout the record lead to something that's really fun to listen to if you like this sort of classic rock type vibe. So definitely a cool one. Another new release at number 16 that just came out, I believe, a week ago. This is the band Rubber Tea and their album From a Fading World. This is Neo-Prog from Germany. At least they're tagged Neo-Prog in Prog Archives, but to me they're more of a jazz psych type rock outfit. They infuse a lot of these jazz elements, especially in the vocals. They have a female vocalist, Vanessa Gross, who's just a fantastic singer, has these really interesting jazzy inflections that carry the album in some ways. The album starts with some tasty Spanish-flavored guitar and strings and a short instrumental lead-in before you get a full-on slinky jazz workout with horns in the track Day of Wrath. Really delightful album with a fantastic blend of jazz and psych with some great organic sounding instruments. There's some saxophone leads and some flute accents done also by Vanessa Gross, who's a fantastic player also. And it just takes you on an epic journey through some great organic sounding instrumentals and some gorgeous vocals. And it's a really great ride of a record that just sounds beautiful, keeps a focus on those gorgeous melodies throughout, and it just sounds pristine and is a divine album that I really have enjoyed and slotted it into the list at the last minute because I've just been enjoying it so much that I felt like it had to have a place here. At number 17, another great group with a female vocalist. This is a group called Shan and the album Omen. This is prog pop, symphonic pop, perhaps chamber pop from Norway. This is a band not unlike Mir, which I fell in love with a couple years back. In fact, Mir won my favorite album of the year in 2021 with Playing House. And this is much along the same vein as that. Excellent female vocals. There's a bombastic synth-led instrumental in the beginning called Okoye before we get into an 80s synth-pop flavored pop track called Up and Over. Deliciously catchy pop hooks, but never sacrificing their great instrumentation and playing abilities. The vocals are just fantastic throughout and hit just the right jazzy inflection to keep it interesting. There's some big bombastic pop songs like Shapeshifter, but they're also able to connect with some great emotional ballads like The Purity of the Acoustic Guitar and Vocal Only Gem, The Path, which is a fantastic track. So they have all the emotion, they're heartfelt, they have these great poppy sounds, but they never sacrifice great musicianship behind it. And that's the kind of music that really sings and speaks to me because I love those great, gorgeous melodies and sounds, and it really catches my ear. So this is another real strong recommendation that I enjoyed. If you like that style, if you were in love with Mir like I was, I think this is an easy recommendation. At 18, we've got Squeaky Feet and the album Cause for Alarm. This is a crossover prog jam band type from the US. Think about Humphreys McGee a little bit, but a bit more expansive and proggier. Moron Police was another touchstone from the person who introduced this to me. Really great album with some extended jams. They give a lot of room for these pieces to breathe. You can imagine that they take these pieces on the road in their jam band type style. They expand on them, do all these like furious solos and things, I'm sure. But what's really cool about them is they blend a lot of different styles into their makes, having moments of prog and fusion and jazz and rock throughout the track list. Pantomime gives you an energetic instrumental opener with prog feel right away. Chance to Grow introduces vocals with some quirky moments and bluesy grooving instrumental sections with prog accents that leads into almost a samba salsa flavor with some tasty flute lines. Generica adds some jazz flourishes with sax leads. Tunnel Vision leads into that jazz fusion direction with the inclusion of Snarky Puppy's Mark Lettieri. Pull the Lever adds some vocoder into the mix, into their sound, and Premonition is a great adventurous prog metal track. So this is just a small smattering of what you can expect from this super eclectic mix of tracks that's on this record. It's a lengthy album. There's a lot to dive into and digest, but it's all a lot of fun and was one of the most fun rides I had listening to new music recently. So I had to put this in the list. It's a great album. Check that one out. At number 19, Bruce Soord with Luminescence. This is crossover prog from the UK. Of course, this is the main frontman and songwriter for Pineapple Thief, and this is his solo record. Beautiful showcase for him. Has that singer-songwriter vibe with minimal arrangements and gorgeous melodies with a bit of a melancholy vibe. The opening Dear Life is just a melodic gem. Lie Flat adds some electronica elements. Alumwak focuses on gorgeously recorded acoustic guitar and backing strings for a melodically rich track. It's just a beautiful record that sounds pristine with some beautiful sounds all the way throughout. You could just sit back and let this wash over you, and the melodies will entrance you. And he just has such a beautiful voice. It sounds just so pristine and well recorded, and great instrumentation throughout the album. It's a bit more laid back and melancholy in its feel, but it's just gorgeous, and I can't deny the talent that's on display there from Bruce Soord. Number 20 is Subsignals, A Poetry of Rain, Neo-Prog from Germany. Another beautiful record that blends a bit of an AOR tinge with some Neo-Prog and then adds a dash of prog metal to give it a little bit of an extra bite. Starts off with a gorgeous atmospheric intro with acoustic guitar before Art of Giving In kicks in as the first proper track with energy in the quirky guitars, both acoustic and electric, and some great melodic vocals. They know how to craft these gorgeous melodies like on Marigold with some fluid guitar lines. Sliver, The Sheltered Garden, gives hints of some quirky prog metal but keeps it grounded with a soaring melodic chorus. The latter half of the album to me feels like it leans heavy into these more ballad type sounds, but always done with fantastic vocals, with great melodies, and still captivate me with those gorgeous sounds and twists and turns, like that great sax breakdown that happens in The Last of Its Kind. Just a beautiful record once again, and a great showcase for an incredible group. Vamusuri, Moving Forward, is my number 21 pick on the list here. Crossover prog from the UK. Another hidden gem that I don't hear people talking about. It's a fairly recent release as well. A melodic female-fronted prog rock that is just melodically gorgeous, but not afraid to rock out at the same time. I was really impressed with these pieces, how she has a very interesting, quirky type vocal style to her that's really captivating but beautiful at the same time. And the band is really able to rock out in some of these shorter introductory tracks. They just have a great style to them. There's a little bit of maybe a Christian tinge to their lyrics, but it's never overly preachy. And they just have a lot of fun with the instrumental sections and rocking out. And it feels like it gets a bit more progressive as the album continues, with some great moments like some bumbling bass lines and Do You Hear Me, some great jazz prog inflections in the guitars and Archaeologist, and a Pink Floyd type feel in the second half of Moving Forward Part 1, Fire. So a lot of great stuff to showcase a lot of promise for this band. I believe this is their first record, and it's quite a grand slam for me personally. I think it's fantastic. I think it gives just the right blend of some heavier, rockier moments, but also beautiful melodic accents from the vocalist and from some other instrumentation. So really great stuff to check out. Number 22 is Velcro Cranes with What If I Die. This is heavy prog from Russia. Giving some nods to bands like Porcupine Tree, Opeth, and Tool. It gives a darker, heavier feel. There's some really cool, interesting keyboard work from Adam Holdsman, who guests on the album, especially in the opening track, Step Aside. When I Was 1 and 20 is a mournful instrumental piece with keys and sad violin. Hold Your Breath is next with some heavy and powerful moments, but transform into some more jazzier type directions. Afterlife, parts 1 and 2 run the musical gamut with some alternative alternative rock, heavy psych prog keyboard workouts, Tool-like tribal drumming, and some heartfelt vocal sections. So it's just a thoughtful album with some great playing throughout and gorgeous melodies. And if you like that darker tinged side of prog, like with the likes of Porcupine Tree, Opeth, and Tool, this should be one to check out. It's a really cool little record that I really enjoyed. Number 23 is Voyager and the album Fearless in Love. This is progressive metal from Australia, and what really works for Voyager is this blend of their heavy progressive metal styles with some delightfully poppy 80s synth work, which creates a very infectious combination of music. The band aren't afraid to go super heavy with some darker riffs, but they stay grounded by Daniel's 80s vocal style and these full-blown 80s synth lines, which bring a bit of that fun, poppier flair to their music. I really like some of the more poppier leaning type tracks, if I'm being honest, that are more like danceable and fun to groove out to, like Dreamer and Promise. They really lean into this more pop-centric side, which I think worked to their favor as they competed in that Eurovision contest and made it fairly far. But that's the style that I tend to like with this band. It made this to be kind of a summer type album, a summer banger, and it was a lot of fun to listen to through those months and being able to hear some of those catchier, poppier elements. So definitely a fun one to check out and look into. Number 24, this is the album Assemblage by White. This is psych rock from Germany. This is a great mixture of psychedelia and stoner rock from two of the guys from Elder, so it has a heritage in that Elder sound, but perhaps not quite as heavy, and this is purely instrumental. There's some moments that are a bit dreamier and more laid back, with some clear Pink Floyd type accents, but it's just gorgeously played, gives a darker, more melancholy, grooving type feel to it. You could feel that darker tinge in the sound as well. But they really settle and groove and let the music just carry you. And it's a fun little ride, so definitely wanted to put it on my list as a cool, especially if you're a fan of Elder and their sound and the more stoner rock, psych type sound, but a little bit more laid back and in the pocket. I think this is one that could be up your alley. And then finally, number 25 is Zero Sync and the album 4.8. This is Crossover Prog from the US. And what's interesting about this is the concept behind it. It's basically they took an episode of a show. They took episode 8 from season 4 of Game of Thrones and composed this music based on what's happening in the episode. So basically you can take the music and lay it under watching Game of Thrones. They said they got the idea from people who talk about watching Wizard of Oz, syncing it up with Dark Side of the Moon and how things like measure up and make sense together when you sync them together. But this they do purposefully. This isn't an accident. They put music that fits the mood of the Game of Thrones episode. But it's fun music on its own as well, not just watching Game of Thrones along with the music, but you get some cool, full-blown melodic progressive rock, not too far removed from like the stuff I love from Neil Morse Band or Spock's Beard. There's some beautiful harmony vocals throughout. There's some jazzier infusions, some 80s AOR styles in the mix, but it's really fun music that I've been enjoying, and it has that added element of almost a concept album as it describes the scenes in that Game of Thrones episode. I love the jazzy prog instrumental fun that happens in the middle of Enemies or Friends. That's what really grabbed me and was one of the standout moments. So this is two members from the band Mile Marker Zero, Jake Ciberon and John Tuohy. They're really going off in their own direction and doing something really unique and creative, and I think it's worth checking out. Another under-the-radar release that I really enjoyed this year. So there you have it. 25 albums, all excellent quality. This is an outstanding mix of things to check out if you're so inclined to the same kind of music as me. And if you're on this channel, I would guess that you are. So I know that was a lot. I better close the show here. Sorry for a lengthier episode, but hopefully you found something in that mix that's worth your time and attention. So thank you, everybody, and hopefully I'll catch you in a future episode. Bye!